Now we take a look at the latest headlines out of Washington. Joining us now is WBKO's Washington correspondent, Josh Rultenberg. Josh, thanks for being here tonight, and it is great to meet you. First off, the U.S. is weeks away from allegedly beginning to default on its debts. Where are we on debt ceiling negotiations?
Yeah, nice to be with you, Sarah. So last Friday's meeting between President Biden and the Big Four congressional leaders was postponed. It's been postponed to tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern time. That's when President Biden and the Big Four congressional leaders will get back into the Oval Office. But since last Tuesday, the staffs of the 5 of them have been meeting for hours on end. And depending on who you talk to, you get a different read of the situation. So the White House says that talks have been progressive and they're progressing towards a solution. But Kevin McCarthy tonight, the House Speaker, said that they're not in a very good place, and he wants to exclusively talk with President Biden. Remember, there's 5 people in the room, but Speaker McCarthy thinks he would do better if it was just the 2 of them in the room. Now, there could be a sense of an area of agreement between Republicans and President Biden and Democrats, and that would circle around a couple of different things. First and foremost, it could be clawing back unspent COVID-19 money. House Republicans say there's about $50 to $60 billion out there, and theoretically, the White House could be willing to work with Republicans to get that money back and to send it elsewhere. Another thing has to do with permitting reform and getting rid of some of the legal red tape that surrounds that issue. Now, with that said, President Biden has said he's not willing to negotiate on raising the debt ceiling, but with all of them in the room together, you're kind of doing that anyway. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen today sent out another letter to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, basically saying that, again, at the earliest, we are 17 days away from defaulting on our debt for the first time. But as of right now, at least publicly, there is no deal.
Now, Josh, Title 42 was lifted last week. What trends are officials seeing at the southern border right now?
Yeah, so there was a huge concern about when Title 42 lifted. And remember, that's the Trump-era health policy that was used as an immigration policy to rapidly expel migrants who were suspected of having COVID-19. Now, when that went away, a lot of people were expecting this massive surge of migrants to come to the border. Well, what we've seen, at least what the White House is saying, is that there has actually been a 50% decrease in the number of migrants and interactions that Custom and Border Patrol agents have had with migrants. Now, the White House is saying that's due to a couple different reasons. Number one, the step up in enforcement and the actual resources that have been allocated to the border by the Biden administration. Also, they're saying that Mexico and other Latin American countries are doing their part to address the issue before it ever even gets to the U.S.-Mexico border. And so you're seeing this giant conglomeration right now of everyone working as Title 42 is lifting. And also, the Biden administration is using another thing called Title 8, where they're working to expedite the removal of those that cross the border illegally. And so as of right now, Secretary Mayorkas, Alejandro Mayorkas with the Department of Homeland Security says it's a little too early to say whether or not we have peaked as far as the migrant surge that could be seen at the border, but nonetheless, things appear to be decreasing right now.
And lastly, Special Counsel John Durham ended his probe into FBI's Trump-Russia investigation, and the report was released today. What do we know from that report?
Yeah, so it was a 300-page report done over a 4-year investigation. And depending, again, on who you talk to about this, there's different conclusions that are come. Now, first, let's start on the right side of things, and I mean the right side as far as politically. The special counsel says that there were missteps from the FBI as far as why they launched a full-scale investigation, that they basically rushed into things because of unconfirmed raw information that was bad intelligence at the time. And you talk to Republicans on Capitol Hill, and they're basically saying, I told you so. That when it comes to the alleged bias, when it comes to the Department of Justice and the FBI and what they like to call the weaponization of law enforcement. Now, the flip side of that is former President Donald Trump said that this was going to be the crime of the century that was going to be uncovered. But that didn't end up happening with this report. In fact, John Durham said that there was enough to conclude that a preliminary investigation was warranted, just not a full-scale investigation at the time. Also, you talk to Democrats on Capitol Hill, and they're basically saying that this was a big waste of time and a big waste of money. Now, shifting things towards the future, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan says he wants Durham to testify in front of his committee next week, but in the Senate Judiciary Chairman Dick Durbin, a Democrat, says he doesn't need to hear more from Durham. So both sides politically, two things can be true at the same time, and they're both taking off and running with what they feel are wins for them in this report.
Well, it's sounding like there's definitely some things we'll check back with you on later this week. From our nation's capital, WBKO's correspondent Josh Rultenberg. Josh, thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me.